Okay, there we go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone watching from Facebook and who signed in through the Zoom link. Welcome to CBE Voices of Color, our June admin speak on the impact of racial and gender inequality in Christian missions. We'll be talking today about the negative impacts on people in communities of color that have been and are still being perpetuated, particularly by the predominantly white and Western or North American mission movements, which are not the only mission movement, by the way, just mention that. We also want to share some practical ideas on how we can start to address these issues. It's a really huge topic that I feel is a bit impossible to cover completely in the time that we have, but I hope to, at the very least, to be able to start a productive conversation here. So we have a pretty diverse group of panelists. I want to give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. First, by saying who we are, where you're from, where you live, your ethnic background, what kind of work that you do. And secondly, to give some context to your experience with or your exposure to missions and mission movement, and just a little bit about how you were involved or impacted and in what location. So a very multicultural group with a lot of cross-cultural experiences here. So I will just start. My name is Elizabeth. I am one of the admin here at CBE Voices of Color. I have been a missionary, sometimes under the term, the M-word term, that missionary word term, and then others times as working for nonprofits, both secular and parachurch organizations, primarily focusing on combating sex trafficking and the factors that put women and children and sexual minorities particularly at risk. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from in this conversation. Currently, I am in Cambodia. Recently moved here from my last post was in South Korea. And prior to that, I was serving primarily in the Caribbean and based out of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So if anybody else wants to jump in and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jan J. Innes, and I currently serve as a pastor in a very multicultural congregation in north of Atlanta in a city called Norcross, Georgia. And prior to that, my first exposure to mission or mission movements was when I was a little girl growing up in Liberia, West Africa. That's where my family's from. And just seeing missionaries come through and do work on teams, and whether it was going to schools and providing supplies, or a lot of times it was sort of something I didn't understand in terms of their content, in terms of their relation to us, but I saw them often, and they were mostly white missionaries growing up. And I also served as a missionary. And so in those years, sort of just thinking about the complexities of what it means to be a missionary and how identify or don't identify with that term at times, like you, Elizabeth, has always been sort of complex thoughts that my mind over and over. So I'm excited to be part of this conversation.
Thank you.
So I'll go next. Um, my name is Maika. I'm from the Philippines and I'm currently serving here in Uruguay in South America. So I'm a Filipina, and with that background, we've been exposed from, well, white missionaries starting from the Spaniards and then the people from the US. And then with that, I grew up in a context where there was this stereotype that when you see a white person, they're going to give you something. So those are the missionaries. They're going to give you something aside from telling you to believe in God, aside from telling you to go to church and all that. So right now, as I am serving here in a very different culture than mine, so basically in Uruguay, most of the inhabitants here were European refugees, and they're basically white. They're basically white. So when I arrived here, there was this, I think, a disconnect because they also have these stereotypes that white people are missionaries. So why is there an Asian person serving a missionary here? So that's kind of interesting. But right now, I'm working with a project of the church here. It gives workshops to young people, especially those in high schools and universities, because right now the churches here are experiencing a kind of gap within that age range. So we're trying to work on that right now.
It's really interesting work. Thank you, Micah.
Hi, my name is Tega Swan. I'm originally from Nigeria. I am a Nigerian American, and I have been in the States for about 20 years. I'm an accidental missionary pastor and church planter. I work with the Beaver Butler Presbytery of the PUSA, and pastor a new church plant in the city of Aliquippa in Ambridge. Name of my church is Refreshing Springs Ministry. So like I said, I am kind of an accidental missionary pastor because I answered the call inadvertently. I wasn't thinking that it never occurred to me. I mean, this was just a weird thing I never expected because I was pursuing another career. But when the Lord issued the call, like, you gotta be kidding. And just like Jan J and Micah experienced, it was kind of odd, especially the area that the Lord sent me to. And it took a lot of questioning, a lot of surrendering, a lot of humility to accept the idea of a person of color missionary to the States. I had a hard time figuring it out because there is no concept for it, right? There is no people of color country where they say we have mission team that we're sending to America, because the concept, it has never been shared with the rest of the world. It's always the West sending people. And so God got me here, and then he started spinning all these terms of me. And so I came to accept it. But I also think the community to which I was sent, even the religious leaders have a hard time accepting it. The religious institutions I was associated with doesn't even understand it. And it was a very weird place to be, where you are neither what they're used to nor anything they've ever envisioned. But just when it made my work very hard. It made it impossible for me to find support or to find affinity with any group because of all the suspicions and stuff like that. But just when I thought it was a hopeless situation, the Lord led me to a community of believers who understood missions, what mission of God was, and that's my presbytery in the PCUSA. And just like that, they got it. I didn't have to explain anything, and that turned things around. And now I enjoy my work. Yeah, I enjoy my work serving and just being a light and bringing the gospel in the unique ways that God is equipping us to do that through my presbytery. Mm-hmm.
Wow, thank you so much. And I think just in the introductions, I've heard so much from each of you touching on some of like the problematic themes that we're going to talk about and the challenges that we're going to discuss in being both a person of color in missions, as well as being a person of color on the receiving end of missions and mission movements. So I'd like to start with the first question now, and that's from your particular point of view, how does the historic marriage of missions with, as Micah talked about, with colonialism, with Western imperialism, that's been going on for hundreds, not thousands of years, and the trope of the white savior, has that had an impact on how the white Western church does missions, how the world views global mission, and the harm that this perpetuates in contexts where their Lord has lived? Micah,
Right,
would you like
so-
to jump in?
Yeah, I think I have the perfect background for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because actually, like the Christian faith started in my country, which is the Philippines, with the Spaniards when they invaded us. So they started like carrying this huge crosses, and then the first thing that they put in the provinces in the Philippines were churches, were cathedrals at the center of each community. And then they started converting the indigenous groups to, well, first Roman Catholics. And then I think after that, so after the Spanish invasion in my country, so we were saved by another group of white, well, mostly white, which came from the United States. And the missionaries, well, the people from the United States basically introduced Protestantism. But at the same time, this concept was retained with us, that the only person who can train someone to be a pastor, the only person who can give you resources to study, for example, whatever, whichever, whether it's related to faith, whether it's related to education or economics or even other aspects of your country, must be or should be more reliable if they came from the US or if they came from Europe, something like that. So growing up, it was like this mentality that we were always the receiver. And at some point, yes, we can give, but not as much as they can give, because they're more reliable, they're more equipped, they have more resources. So the kind of harm that I think until now is there, it's like when you encounter, for example, Filipino pastors, not just with my affiliation, my religious affiliation, it's that there's this certain dependence to foreign missionaries, especially financially, because we cannot start a project on our own. We cannot start a mission church on our own because we don't have the resources. Or on the other hand, we think that way because we know that someone outside from the country can help us than just start this church on our own, given this context. And then when I came here, well, going to my experience here, Uruguay is a very secular country. Well, they almost consider themselves as almost atheists already. It's this extreme separation of the church and state, which at some point in their history, there was this huge commotion between the Roman Catholic Church and some Protestants, wherein it was a competition of power. It was not a topic of faith, a topic of mission. It was this power dynamics being played within Roman Catholic Church and then the Protestants, wherein the Protestants were they joined forces with a certain group, like the Freemasons. They joined forces, and then moving forward, everyone lost their credibility as a church, and so as a result, like until now, the government does not rely or believe anymore. If there's a religious cause, there's this mindset of them that it will not help this country, so let's just shut it down, something like that. So right now, I think my background from the Philippines and what happened here in my place of mission right now is really fascinating, but at the same time, it's really challenging, because at some point, I feel like there's a barrier, like a double barrier. One is because I'm Asian, and they have Asian stereotypes here, or stereotypes with people of color, because we're minority as well here in Uruguay. And so there's this tendency that they won't believe me, not just because of my background, but what happened with this community in the past as well.
Well, I can go next. So from my point of view, have the historic marriage of missions with colonialism, Western imperialism, the trope of the white savior impact how the Western church does mission? And what kind of harm this perpetrates in my context? So I was not really aware of the West doing missions before I came over, and the Lord called me into this, into being a missionary. So I grew up in Nigeria, and Nigeria was colonized by the British, and the only connection that I had directly with missions in Nigeria is the fact that my father was the first generation mission convert, so I'm second generation. But because the British kind of exited the scene pretty quickly in Nigeria, we don't really have a lot of missionary influx after that. Yes, we did have the history in the early days, but by the time I grew up, all of that had kind of ceased, and we were doing our own churches and stuff like that. My experience of missions and the complexities of it came about when I was called into it, in just seeing the way that the Western church does missions, and going back to try to understand why this happened. I found out in the history of the church, I mean, being in seminary and all that stuff, I found out in the history of the church that when the Europeans first went to people of color countries, they had a disdain for the people of color because of the color of our skin. They looked down on us, and not only that, they appropriated both our physical bodies as well as the natural resources of the land for their own benefit. But they did it in this way because at that time, that's when exploration was big. All the European countries trying to claim land all over the globe for themselves. When they did this, they justified it with the scriptures. And they were doing it for the kingdom of God. They were saving us, the savages. And that, for people who are familiar with America's history of slavery and all that, that's also where that gumption to actually enslave people came from. Like, oh, you're using them to build the kingdoms of the lands that God has blessed. So my being here 20 years and just seeing the mindset and the attitudes of the West towards, especially here in North America where I live, towards people of color, even though it's benevolent, it still has not changed. There's still that attitude that the people of color countries need salvation, they need Christianity more than the West. I don't know about any other of the African countries, but I'm thinking to myself, when I went to college in Nigeria, I went to one of the largest universities, and I basically studied with a lot of people from many countries in Africa, and all of them were Christians. There are very few of them who are Muslims. So it's kind of odd to me that mission is so driven from North America to people of color, as though you are going afresh to save people there. They have never heard the gospel, where that's not the case. And then the other aspect is what Micah shared about is this, what I have observed is this huge focus of, in the process of saving, there's this huge narrative that the people are so poor, they're so incompetent, they need wells, they need goats, they need clothes, they need this, they need that. While I don't think it's a lie that some people are in need, I think it's a very false idea and is a bearing of false witness that does horrible damage to the people of color countries, when the only narrative they get about us is the countries are poor. So you go to, it's like, it's, to me, I've said this before and I say it again, but it's almost as though when folks come from North America and go to other African countries or people of color countries, it's almost as though they don't go through roads, they have no modern infrastructure. The only thing you're gonna see is whatever village they went to, the pictures of whatever demographic they have identified of need, and those are the pictures you'll see. Now, what people don't realize is that that's very damaging to the people who come from that country. So when I came to the US about over 20 years ago, I remember being astounded by a question someone asked me, and I am not kidding. This was 1996. And to hear a person ask me that question in the 20th century was so amazing to me. I was stunned. So she asked me, she says, so do you guys live on trees? I was so stunned that I said, yes, we do. And when you come visit me, I will keep the next tree for you, the one next to me. I will let that be your bed, you know? But when I said that, there was this amazement in me that, are you kidding me? I mean, where do these people get this concept from? But I had just arrived, you know? So it took me a longer time getting involved in ministry to get that. But even then, I have, so just this last week, my church plant, we celebrated our 4th year. And one of our young youth, she said to me, we're having, you know, just everybody doing their own thing, finding their own level during the picnic. And she came to me and she says, Pastor Tega, you guys suffer where you come from? I said, well, no more than any other people. She said, things really hard there. I said, well, not any more harder than it is here. She said, but why is it that all the time we see the pictures, the kids are really suffering and they have flies all over their faces? And I had to be honest with her and told her, I said, those are misrepresentations. And I said, you don't have to believe that. Now, here is the deal. When people do this, they think it's justified. They are being honest about their mission context, but it's not. You might be the only voice that people have to be introduced to that particular country you went to. It's like me in the context I'm working now to decide to use that as a representation of the entire America. It's not even up to 100. of the entire population of America. So I think that that does a lot of damage. And then also the fact that somehow the West never gave up this constant one-way trip to do missions in people of color countries. It has, like Micah says, it trains people of color to think there is something missing in their Christianity that only the white can give. When we started our church plan, we had kids as children and youth centered. And I remember one day, a lot of the pastors from my presbytery, they came to worship with us. And I have this, sometimes I use this method of preaching where I invite people to talk back to me and I ask questions. And I was teaching on something about the personhood of God. And I was trying to teach that Jesus was the only visible representation of God that we know, to say, here is God. And but in order to lead to that point, I wanted to let them identify that there was no other person like Jesus. So I asked this question: do you know what God looks like? And this little kid, he was about 9 years old, he put up his hand and he said, yes. So I was shocked. I was like, really? I was like, okay, I asked, I'm gonna let him answer. So I said, what does he look like? And he said, he's a white man. And all our hearts were broken. All the pastors, we gathered and we lamented after that. Our hearts were so broken, in my leadership in the presbytery that day just was so convicted that what did we do? We all asked this question: what has the church done that gave the idea to a young man or kid that God is a white man? So I do think that it helps to emphasize to people of color that people of color are more broken than white folks, and it's very difficult for people of color to see themselves as equally sharing in the image of God, if we're constantly, and not to talk about the fact that it never created room for there to be reverse missions, So here I am. I didn't even know I was a missionary until the Holy Spirit spoke to me in the context of what I was doing, until I traced my steps, and I had people come alongside me. But the resistance people had, I remember when my colleagues in that little community would introduce me, the men, she said that God, she's an African, and she said that God called her from Africa or something. But it was not said with a sense of normalcy, because I would not introduce, or none of them would go to missions in the people of color country, and someone would say, they say God called them from America. And you would welcome them and say, here. So that even that concept where no one is prepared to encounter God sending people to North America it's very problematic. It's like saying God is one-sided and people of color need more salvation or more saving. And so God keeps sending Westerners to them.
That was so rich. Thank you so much. And there's so much to unpack in that. I think what I'll add briefly to the sort of negative messages that colonialism, whatnot, has had on mission, and that white savior complex is, so as a child, I would add to what Micah said, that also in Liberia, a lot of times our response to missionaries was about what they could give, because they had put themselves in a position of always doing things for others. But also another thing I want to add to that was just like this notion of superiority that was just felt in the context. So, and in one visible way that often happened, and I think it was sort of the people who were in Liberia who were receiving missionaries were often sort of like the higher ups who were part of the church work and doing the negotiations of welcoming missionaries, still also had that mentality that these people were super special in coming to us to do nice things for us. So often we used to have these places called compounds. And I know in Nigeria, they have compounds, these very big houses and their fences around them. So we will often have missionary compounds where it will only be missionaries that would live there for whatever the length of time was that they were serving there. And so there was this notion of like, they would go out to do their thing, the mission that they came to do, and then would go back to their compound, right, and hide themselves there or do what they had to do or unwind. So there was always like this, there was this void of relationships that was established, like deeper, getting to know people for who they are and learning about what the gifts of the people are in the community, that you're not going there to do everything for people, but how can we work in partnerships? So that was often lacking as like a little girl looking in, or at least in retrospect, sort of unpacking what I saw as a kid was something that was very noticeable. So this notion of doing our thing and then coming back to be who we are and never really creating room to build authentic relationships. So I too, when I had my experience as being a missionary, I served in the United States, right? So this notion of reclaiming or reimagining what mission looks like. So serving, what does it mean to say mission is something that's needed all over the world? That's what God sends us to transform the world. So even in our own backyards here in the United States, we are in need of mission. People are broken, people are marginalized. So going from one end, East Coast, and going to the West Coast, what does it mean then, knowing and sharing all of the things that you all have shared as the reality of what mission has been for so many years? What does it mean for me now to be a missionary? Am I going to claim that title? So I think knowing so much of the damage that mission had done and the white savior complex and colonialism, imperialism, I think I wanted to be very careful, even as I was working, because I was working with immigrant communities. So people who, though were in the United States, had the impact of mission in their histories from their countries. So what does it mean then? I was almost like undercover often, right? Did not want to reveal myself, even though as a woman of color, didn't want to reveal that I was a missionary, because I didn't want those tropes to be like put back onto me. Or even if I wasn't a white person, and I'm not a white person, but maybe I was there to give something. So I think I was trying to do a lot of damage control as a missionary serving the US, revealing that I was a missionary only if I was in spaces where people knew of that language, but often with the people to just sort of be quote unquote normal and not unveil that because of all of like the baggage that comes with it. So I think just looking back, that's kind of what the white savior complex or the damaging tropes of what it means to be a missionary or mission work historically has done, that we sort of have to do damage control now and think about like all of the baggage and meaning that comes behind holding that title. And so it's a space that I still live in and I'm very conscious of as I'm doing sort of local mission as a faith leader or a church leader, a pastor in the context that I'm in right now, because I'm still working with those very vulnerable, marginalized communities. And so if we think of the church that exists for mission or mission as an extension of the church, then often people have those same kinds of mentalities or negative reactions to the church, right? So how then do we say, no, it's God's mission, and God's mission is more about relationships, and unfortunately we have to live with the reality of the kinds of histories that we carry if we're going to be part of this institution. And then how do we sit with it, own it, but also like undo it in real ways? So that's kind of what I wrestle with today as or a person of faith and a leader in my community.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Excuse me. Thank you all so much for sharing so clearly, and I think that was kind of what I was referring to as like the M word, because it does carry so much baggage, and it is a responsibility that we take on when we choose to engage in what is ultimately God's mission, but still carries this legacy of something that is very much not of God, that is rooted in racism and white superiority, Western superiority. For me, growing up as a Korean American, I'm biracial, but I attended a Korean American church, and it was very evangelical, very much had kind of this mission orientation, but it was completely inherited by white mission movements and white theology and white pastors, and that just became synonymous with missions for me, and I never even questioned it until I got involved quite young, like right out of college, in missions myself. And one of the things that I did first notice, and that really no one in any type of like missions training had prepared me for, and I think this is another issue, is that the training is not really focusing on the right things in sending missionaries out, is that my first mission post was in Haiti, which is often referred to as an NGO state, because there are so many missionaries and NGOs there that they're pretty much running the show as far as how finances are moving in and out of the country, and creating this kind of perpetual state of dependency that maintains this idea that people who come from the outside, who come from the United States, who come from Europe, have something to give, have more to offer, have, just the high ground, right? On the one hand, it perpetuates that. On the other hand, it also perpetuates the state of, well, I'm just going to use these people as much as what I can get, right, from them. And that's not, like you were saying, John Jay, that's not relationship. And it doesn't do anything to further the gospel or to bring healing. There's a lot of what I saw was what I called dropping drive-by Jesus bombs, just like going out in the street doing, maybe a performance that is supposed to explain the gospel, usually in a very childish way, in a way that's kind of condescending. And then I was there for how many years? 3-4 years, and watching the people who would just keep going back, right, to these types of events. And every time they would do a call for salvation, then the same people would go forward, because they knew at the end of listening to all of this, they were going to get something practical that could feed their family, or what have you. And really, there was no real relationship. There was no sharing of the good news. And another thing that I began to observe at that time, and have continued to see since, in both in that context and in other contexts that I've worked in the Caribbean and in Asia and Southeast Asia, is people taking credit from what is happening on the ground, from what local communities are doing, from what local leaders are doing, and calling it partnership, but really giving themselves this title that maintains this kind of this idea that white people, or in Haiti they're called blancs, which means white in French, whether you're white or not, it doesn't matter. You come from the legacy of this white missions movement, and you come from a predominantly white country, you're a blanc. And so this organization, and this is not to bash on one particular organization, but just to speak to an experience that this is happening. But in my particular case, they sent me out with training and with a job title of what I was supposed to do, and that job title included project management. And when I got there, I saw that that's not really the relationship that my organization had with the people that I was partnering with on the ground. And that wasn't reflective of what I was doing, because what I was really doing was I was living with them, and I was learning, and I was contributing very specific skills, and amplifying whatever the needs were of our partner, because they are the experts. And so for me, I ended up having to go back to the organization and say, this isn't an accurate reflection. This is an inflation of my role. And the cynical part of me says, that's for donors. That's for people to feel like, oh, this person is doing something really important. Western donors saying this person is doing something really important, so I should give them money, right? When the fact is, like, what I was doing was important, but it was not what they were projecting that I was doing. Because people don't want to pay or donate for someone to go and just to be in relationship and to offer whatever their particular skills are. They want this higher purpose, this inflated idea of meaning. And I think that comes from that white savior mentality. And so education is needed both in the mission community and for donors to begin to rectify that. My next question is, what is one of the most pervasive exploitative practices in mission movements currently or historically? I think we've talked a lot about historically, but some maybe more current that you've observed, and the negative impact of that particular practice on people and communities of color. The reason I worded the question this way, of one of the most pervasive, is because there are many that we could talk about, but hopefully we can touch on a few here now. So whoever wants to jump in. Tiga, I think that your mute button is on.
Oh, okay, thank you. I said I'll go again. And even though you said we're leaving the history behind, what I've realized is that we are actually still doing missions in a historical way. So missions is still based on Europeans seeing Africans and people of color as people who need saving. Anybody who hasn't, please pick up this book, The Christian Imagination by Willie James Jennings. There is a story he shared in there. He's an African American, and he's the son of Baptist ministers. But he shares a story right here in America from when he was little, and some white Christians had come evangelizing or whatever, and they had stopped in front of their house or met them on the farm or something. Somewhere they met them, and they were trying to evangelize to his mother and try to get her to come to church. And she told them, not only was she a Christian, her husband was a pastor, they were running this church, and the people just kept on talking and talking, trying to convince her to be a Christian, even after she gave that information. And Willie James says he was wondering that, what was that about? Are they not convinced that she's a Christian until she comes to their way? Then is that when she becomes a Christian? So that's one thing, is reducing whatever we have to contribute to the Christian narrative. As long as I know, I got my master's, the seminary I got my master's, there was never one single voice of people of color missionaries contributing, or people of color theology in all the stuff we studied for 3 years. Not a single one. There was not learning from one single person about the practices of Christianity. So it's always the West. Like I said, I've been here 20 years. I got my seminary degree here. I'm working on my doctorate here. But you'll be surprised how many people in the Christian community and even in the Christian religious institutions don't think to ask me about anything. Like, there's nothing for me to contribute to that. And what has been a very amazing thing to me is how the mission groups that are sometimes sent to people of color countries, they're not even as qualified as I am. They haven't been on the ground as I have been. They don't have the insights. They don't know what I did to be here. In the context, they never ask, what is your ministry? How does it work? And stuff like that. And it amazes me that for people of color countries, their Christian leaders still retain this idea that they have to learn Christianity from the whites, when really, as the body of Christ, we're supposed to feed each other. So what is going to happen? You will have a pastor who has been in ministry for years in a person of color country. You will have a kid who's in seminary here, will be shipped over there to go teach someone. There's no going to try to say, what can we learn from you? Or would you come over and teach us? I think that creates a disparity in our Christian experience. And when I think about the global church right now and the people wanting to be relevant, I think the reason things are missing is the things that needed to be filled by Christians from all over the world. The church in America is not receiving it. The church in Europe is not receiving it. So they keep going on the one side, but they're not being filled by the other side. So there is that disparity. The church in the West is losing, and then the church in the global South is also losing because they never get to use their gifts. I can't tell you how I feel like a lot of times I'm just flowing like, Lord, I can't take this. I want to just be in a context where I can actually work and do my work well. But people are not ready for you. They're not going to, how many books about Christianity do you come across that is being referred to or quoted as someone you learn from who is a person of color? And so, and that is a huge problem for me, because I see that it makes everybody the same, which is not really the case. So if the West prescribes a situation for their context, they end up taking it over and going to ship it to our context where it's not even relevant. And then what happens, they end up, it's like what do you call it, cross-pollination or something of disease in a way. Whatever the disease is here, you take it and you go spread it over there, rather than saying maybe they have a solution to that disease. But what about here? The people of color here are still recipients of the disdain that European approach to missions put on people of color, because in this country, people of color are still seen as less than. There's no imagination to think that their spirituality means something. How many white people will think on a day when they have nowhere to go to church, let me go into a Black church? Not like this, I will be served here. I could see myself being a member, in this church, so I think it creates a lot of inequality that is still perpetuated even right here in the West for people of color, and that inequality continues to create divisions. There's no unity in the body of Christ because Blacks or people of color are still separated from whites, and the spirituality is more seen on the one side, white side, and the people of color are seen as non-spiritual. No matter how much you learn, no matter what you know, they're suspect of your spirituality.
Yeah, I'm trying to, Elizabeth, because you said currently, and I'm trying to think about even now, I would say that just because I'm working within the US context, I would say maybe that we just constantly need to be reminded of that we're doing things alongside people, that we're doing mission with, and not to or for. And even I'll share a little bit of when I was serving as a missionary, I was sent from the East Coast to the West Coast working at a nonprofit for people from all over the world, and we offer various social services with them. And often, I think in the nonprofit world, in social work world, we need to just think about the term often client that we use. Like, I think even our terminology sometimes is a way of speaking down to, or we're like there's this sort of obsession with this dependency notion that's within that I'm sorry, did you lose me? Within those helping professions. And I just wonder if we thought about journeying together, if we thought about doing things with and working with people as they experience or move into what abundant life looks like for them in new contexts, that we could see more of their gifts and what they bring to and how they enrich our spaces, as opposed to thinking of them as like with. So only because a lot of what I'm doing now is trying to respond to needs of communities. And so that means working a lot with social service organizations, which aren't necessarily mission organizations, but even as we do, I'm sorry for the interruption, even as we do faith-based mission, to just think about all of us as participants in leading one another into a more abundant living space and wholeness, as opposed to like, those are our clients and that we're doing things for them. So I think currently sort of shifting our language and how we do work with people who are vulnerable or vulnerable populations will be crucial as the church engages in more meaningful mission in the upcoming years. I mean, for life, right? Because that's what we're called to as Christians, always and forever, to be a representation of God, of Christ to the world for those in need. So how even in our language, are we creating silos or creating hierarchies in the way that we speak about the people that we are working with? So that's what I would say in terms of checking ourselves as we're doing mission in this day and age, to be mindful of how we speak about and how we work with, or think about working with as opposed to them or for them, because I know it all, I have it all, and they have nothing to give. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for those very rich answers. I think, John Jay, yeah, you totally hit it on the head for me, and what I've been thinking about of how much the language that we use matters, and then questioning why we continue to use this language when we know that it is alienated, when we know that it does put up barriers, it does uphold this notion of the white savior. And those are things that with groups that I've worked with before, terms like being a voice for the voiceless, when in reality there are very, very few, if any, who have voices and need to be coached and taught on how to use them, and their voices need to be amplified. We need to be open to hearing their voices, and that's something that in missions we it's an all too common term, that we want to go out and we want to be an advocate and be bring light to things that people aren't talking about or people don't know, most particularly towards people of color. And people of color don't need us to be their voice. They don't need anyone else to be their voice. People of color need our own voices amplified. And so when we're thinking about what stories are we telling through the language that we use, what stories are we telling through the photos that we share, what stories are we telling in our newsletters of what we're accomplishing, right, in order to get more funding, in order to appear that whatever we're doing is worthy or worthwhile, when really it's God that determines the worth. And if we are going as strangers into someone else's territory or their land, their arena, where they are the expert, we should be just humbled, and our approach should be that of one who is learning, and who can bring whatever skills that we have to partner with and to assist, but in a manner, I think that word is so important, doing mission with, and not to or for. And then Tega, as you mentioned about this tendency to send people who are not as equipped just because they are Western or white. And this phrase that gets used over and over again of God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. But that doesn't mean that you thrust an unequipped person into a person of Trinity to perpetuate harm. And that's okay, because God can use even imperfection. And this narrative is really, really harmful, because good intentions while good to have good intentions, they are not enough. The impact matters. And it's resulted in unqualified people in the field doing more harm than good. And so we have this like lack of critique of professional standards. Even Micah mentioned earlier, I think that, you know, people in her community growing up saw white people as being more qualified, but that was based on their own projection of themselves as more qualified, when in fact they likely weren't. So the next question is that as a person of color, and I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit, so if we could just kind of talk briefly about this one, a person of color or a person of non-North American nationality, what problems or challenges have you or others encountered when you're trying to partner with or work in majority white North American run missions organizations? And again, we've kind of touched on it a little, but if you could just each add your final thoughts.
I can start. I think with this theme, because I'm currently working with, well, the office is based in the US, and I think the challenging part was the receiving part. For example, here in my place of assignment, that there's this notion that I'm sort of a substitute of what people can do, so I can do it for them. I'm not sure if in the bigger picture, there's this projection of missionaries from the US that they do this, that there's something you can do, but they can do it for you. And I think there's a sort of expectation of from me to do that as well. And it's hard because, for example, like the language. So when I arrived here, I mean, my English doesn't function. So I learned English, and from my country, we grew up learning English, like in the school. As simple as the language, people expect you sometimes to teach them English. And on my part, if they don't need the language, they don't need to learn it, but they have this perception that if you know English, if you watch shows from the United States, especially Netflix, they have a lot of Netflix here. There's this notion of status. There's this notion of capacity that you can do more. So, oh, you're from a missions organization from the US, so you can offer us this, and this. Well, in fact, I don't want to offer you that because you already have your capacity. Your system is running with your own language, as simple as the language, and with the other things in the society, like their ways of managing things and all that. But when they see you as someone from the US or being sent from the US, they see you as someone more effective. Maybe you know more stuff than us. Maybe you can do better with these things than us because you were trained in the US. So I think that's a huge barrier. Well, at the same time, it's just an illusion. I mean, these people are able, they have the capacity, but it stops them as well instantly upon knowing that she's being sent from the US and all that.
For me, so I think with people of color missionaries, God is working in ways that I see Jesus saying to the disciples, you know, if you go to a place, if there's opening for you there, stay, and from there give the gospel. And I think a lot of folks in North America don't realize that a lot of people who are staying among them from foreign lands, they're actually missionaries. They are not here to rape you. I know that people find it difficult to think that you could have it better by staying in your own land, but that's because they've never lived with us in our lands to see what the gifts are, what kind of lives we have over there, and they assume it's better here. But again, that's because of those stories that were framed right from the days of colonialism, right? That have never changed and have somehow been inherited by the current church. And I want to be honest and say, I don't think the current church does it maliciously, but it was just something that was inherited and it was never challenged. Nobody forced them to see. And I think, when you're trained to do something in a certain way, you don't see other stuff. They just go zoom. Let's find somewhere something is broken. People going to neighborhoods and say where are the broken doors and whatnot. And so what happens is that people stop doing their work. We've labeled about that. But another biggest thing is it creates a lack of hospitality for us people of color who come here, who are sent by God to be here. We don't come here we're sent by God. And I know that's one of the pains that hurt me a lot for many years before I met my Presbyterian. We fell in love with each other. The pain I used to feel, I always used to compare the way African countries receive white folks, the way we create space for them, the way we don't immediately jump to the conclusion that they are crappy, that they are less than. And I was shocked the way I was constantly met with an assumption of lack, an assumption of less than. I remember one young man, half my age, was saying to me one time, a person like me is not the kind of person who should help people, and I went back and I thought about it, but it was the projection where even though as a person, as the ministry leader, in his mind was already forged with this thing that the situation of people of color is so bad, they need the help from white people and not the reverse. Now, here's the thing that I think is really problematic about that. The history of the problems that people of color have is being shut off in that kind of conversation. The people of color didn't have problems until white supremacy came in there. Our lands were functioning fine, no worse off or no better than. There's always civilization in Africa. Even in the country I grew up in, their stuff dates back to the early days, So when these stories are being, the people we're going to save, we're not even looking at their histories to say how come they are in this situation. So like Elizabeth said, I think a lack of education is a huge issue. The education again that is given over here is crafted by either people who go from here, people of color countries, or the ones over there who want to get from them. And they craft the things that will cause people to open their purses. But that's not missions. The mission of Christ, which he sent out to us and to the apostles, is about bringing people in, like he brought people in. It's about reconciliation. It's about dwelling with. And it's not about how much money you can get. Well, talking about money is important for missions, right? Jesus says we're sent without purse, without whatnot. We're dependent those to whom we're sent for our livelihood. Well, not being received means that we're hungry and we're poor and we lack. And that was my circumstance for about 6 years. I dwelled in abject poverty, and yet people will see me and she's poor, but not realizing it was their lack of hospitality, their unwillingness to come alongside me, especially in America, in order to get any kind of assistance. The donors want to see who your partners are. And by rejecting the idea, finding it so hard to believe that God could call someone from an African country to come and be that solution, the way you see yourself as a solution to issues in their country, that's closed-mindedness created lack of partnership, which also created lack of finances for me. So in that way, people of color, we have a disparity. I don't know what the rest of you all experiences are with that, but for me, it was a huge disparity in having a livelihood. Until this very day, I don't even bother to do fundraiser because nobody believes you. If I had a white person start a fundraiser, within 10 minutes, they would get money. But my black face doing a fundraiser for ministry, it just doesn't make sense. I've done fundraisers and it just sits there. Nobody even contributes $1 or whatever. So that disparity is in hospitality and lack of contribution of our voices and continuing to silence people of color, even in this land, because they can never see themselves as good until they see themselves as participating in the mission of God. And when we exclude the voices of color from participating in missions, then they will always be seen on the outside. They'll always see themselves outside the mission of God.
I don't have much to say, but just echo that representation matters. I think that's what you were trying to say, Taga, at some point. That what does it mean when we see ourselves, our faces, as participating, as active participants in God's mission, and how that changes the dynamic of understanding our own gifts and what we can do and what we are capable of. I was thinking about this story. One of the missionaries that the young adults that we work or that I serve with one time told this story of going, having been from the Congo and was serving somewhere in, I think in Brazil or something. And the notion that after the initial oh, you're not a white person, but you're a missionary, sort of weared away, and relationships began to be formed, that this young boy, knowing the history of Brazil and how many Africans were sent over that way, this was a Congolese African young adult who's serving with children of color in Brazil. And after those walls have been broken, and it's this is not about a handout, but I'm here to be in relationship with you. This young boy of color also believing that he too, oh wow, I can be a missionary as well one day. What does it mean to see yourself, as being called by God, and that dynamic changed only because the shift happened where a Black man from the Congo is now in mission in Brazil, and how that breaks down all the barriers and expectations of who can be a missionary and what kind of impact they can make. So I think just echoing what you said about what representation can do, and we need more of that, our voices and our faces in mission.
Yeah, thank you all. I guess I would also just echo that of representation and how much it matters. And as far as challenges or barriers of working within a majority white mission organization, or just knowing that missions from a North American perspective has been majority white people, and being half white and half Korean, and feeling like I kind of have to erase a little bit of the Korean side of myself because everybody sees me as white anyway, which is not the case in the United States. but abroad, being an American, having light skin privilege, that is how I'm seen. But one thing I have noticed is that when people do find out my ethnic background and my connectedness to the Korean American community, my connectedness to Korea, I have found that it has broken down some of those barriers relationship-wise, and have had people come to me and say, you know, I feel like I can say this to you because you understand Korean culture, where I couldn't say this to a white person because it's not what they want to hear and it's not what they would understand. And so that just highlighted for me that importance of having that representation and having people who can connect culturally, or who are willing to put into the work to be able to connect in that way. And I also feel, not with the current organization that I'm working with, but with past organizations, both in the Korean American church and in white American churches, that my identity as Korean American makes me kind of a token, because everybody else is so white, that it's like, oh, what we have, you know, people of different races, meaning like one biracial Korean American. And therefore, when I, you know, air any grievances about racial inequality or any concerns, it's, oh yeah, we hear you as a minority voice because we want to treat you as our token minority voice at this point. But ultimately, it results in very, very little change. Yeah, let's shift to the final question. And that is, what is the way forward? So what are some of the practical steps that you believe that the white Western church needs to take to engage in missions that fully embody the egalitarian nature of the gospel, when it comes to partnering with people of color, and specifically women of color? And how do we decenter whiteness in missions to uphold the dignity and equality of all people? I think one, in the ways that we partner with the local community, particular POC communities, and how we choose and define who missionaries are and what they do.
Am I on? Okay. I think for me, my first one would be theological education needs to be changed. Because or rather, let me put it this way, it needs to be both changed and it needs to be expanded. Theological education is bordered on the philosophy and theologizations of a lot of Westerners. We don't hear the people of color voices. And one of the things that I believe that is that being a Christian does not erode ethnicity. And God sees our ethnicity and he sees our cultures, and each culture brings something to the table to make it a fuller representation of the body of Christ. So when we come to meet Jesus, our skin colors are not going to be erased. I don't believe that. There's something particular, and I think about in the book of Revelations when it says when Jesus is welcomed, all nations, tribes, and tongues are going to welcome this king. So how are we going to be all nations if there's only one perspective in spiritual formation? So we have spiritual formation practices as people of color that is missing in the West. I know when I first came here, I was crying so much for lack of things, but they were not physical things. It was the spiritual lack. The certain things to do that were just part of everyday life of a Christian in Nigeria that even the pastors here are not used to doing. I remember talking to one pastor and he was like, oh no, what is that? You know, they don't do that. Why should they have to do that? So things as simple as fasting or evangelism or things like that. Why should we? The idea, you even hear it from Christians today in North America, the idea is that North America is a Christian continent and every single person there is a Christian. That's the idea. And so I think if we were to invite the voices of people of color theology, by inviting them to share with us a lot of their practices in their churches without judging, just or in a way to do that. One of the ways that I think to do that, I want to pick on what Jan just said, is being with the people. There's too much of head knowledge around theology. Theology is being treated like any discipline where we're in it for competition. How many books can your theologians write? It's not on what is real Christian formation. What is it like to live it out? I don't know how many books the apostles wrote. Come on, look at Peter, who's the apostle of the church. His books aren't even up to 6 pages. They don't make up 6 pages. Yet the focus is so much on the intellect, on rationalization, that is not as practical. Whereas as Africans, because our pedagogy is mostly in narrative and in lived out life and culture, we could really help to inform practices, even to people who are not educated. And I think about the ministry into which I'm called right now. And every time even when I was doing my master's in seminary, how every time I heard what was being taught, I always had to quickly unpack it in my brain, break it down. And the question I always asked myself, would the average person on the street understand this concept in such a way that it communicated the love of God to them? Western theology doesn't know how to do that. However, in people of color countries, we know how to do it. You know how to translate formative principles because we are built up in cultural practices. Whereas in the West, it's more of an individualized lifestyle. So there's no way to impact another person except through argument and debate. In people of color cultures, we impact through, yes, the word is preached, but also through formative practices that are not necessarily written in a book. You gotta sit with us to learn it. So I would like to propose also a shift in the purpose of sending. And here I want to brag on Pittsburgh Theological Seminary a little bit, because they are concerned about doing missions in the right way. I was just talking with the director of the Metro Urban Institute, and she's talking to me about how they are strategically shifting their mission so that they're not sending people anymore the way they send people go do this or go teach. They send them to go and learn, go and sit down with them and learn. I want to go a little bit further and say, just send them to go stay with them. Look for people who want to relocate. Just relocate your life for about 3 years and just go and find out how you're going to live there. Go find a job that's not church related, but stay with a family, a host family, and just live like normal people there. So I'm going to stop here because I know everybody has something else to add.
I'll just say briefly, I've been thinking about this notion of inclusiveness, that I think there's still this idea that like white people are at the center of the table, or like at the center, and therefore need to like scoot over or make room for. But what does it mean to just completely like dismantle the entire system or erase the margins, or and and work with and understand that all people come with valuable gifts and knowledge, and are teachers, and understand mission contextually from their own cultural perspectives, and how do we see each other as experts in those fields, and therefore use one another's knowledge in order to do mission for the sake of the gospel, and do it well for that. So I think as we're thinking of decentering whiteness, or thinking about the more egalitarian, what the gospel is about, that all are welcome, is to literally dismantle the system of white supremacy that sort of puts whiteness in the center, um, and rethink this notion of inclusion, and to just think about what does it mean to, as people of God, created in God's image, carrying God's breath, and life, and creative breath, right? It's a creative breath of God. Then what does it mean to see each person as carrying that creativity within themselves, and to know what it means to like reach the lost or the broken in their own communities, or from their own cultural or historical perspective. So I think those are parts of the conversation that need to be had as we think about what does it mean to decenter whiteness, and focus on the voices of color that have been marginalized or suppressed for long. So moving forward, thinking about those things.
Yeah, so I think just to add to that, from my perspective as well, it's very enriching, and at the same time, I just want to say that we, I mean, all of us, needs to need to remove this notion that some people groups are senders, like they have the resources, that's why they're gonna send people to these places. Sorry. And so they're gonna send people to these places without resources. But no, the only sender is God. All these resources that we have belongs to him. So every one of us are sent and are being sent. There's For me, there's no difference with that. There are different callings, yes. There are different places to go. There's gonna be different gifts, like what John Jay said, like what Tia said, also, and what Elizabeth shared. But the only source is the one who called us, and that's God. And our only example is Jesus. I mean, it's not difficult to understand. And so I think in time, as we modernize the church, as we modernize the concepts of mission, it has been diverse, but at the same time, the foundational the foundational concepts of the sender and the receiver, and the people who are being sent to harvest, and the workers that are not different by classification. I mean, everyone is called to go and do the harvest. And I think it's essential that as we also serve, and for future missionaries to serve in partnership with, instead of working for a community, or instead of working for an organization, it's important that we recognize that everyone has gifts, everyone has something to also offer to God, not just to people, but sometimes people don't see their gifts because of some factors that happen along the way, especially in the church. but in reality, we all have something to share, and that's the most enriching part of this fellowship of the body of Christ. That we are called, some of us are eyes, some of us function as hands, some of us function as hair, and there's no little, there's no um, useless part of the body of Christ. And I think that's essential as we move forward to missions, that we keep in mind who is the real source, who is the real sender, and us being sent and receiving gifts and sharing it with the community.
Oh, sorry for the delay. I was having a hard time unmuting myself. But yeah, thank you all so much for your input. I think that's what you said, Micah. That's really kind of the heart of the matter, is where are we seeing that that this source and purpose of mission lies, and how do we rectify the harm that has already been caused, and address that so that we don't continue to perpetuate that, and so that we can bring healing to some of those areas. And I think you guys touched on a lot of the big ideas that are important, of educating and the value of dwelling with, and taking it one step further. I think that in the mission movement, we need to consider putting our money where our mouth is, and that if we do truly recognize that all people have expertise to bring to the table, that we don't continue what Tego was talking about, of a missionary has to look a certain way and have a certain role, and not be a person of color, be a white person, to be worthy of funding, because missions is our calling as Christians. And when we go out as vocational missionaries, we are worthy of our wages. And I think a lot of what is happening is the money is getting concentrated and sending out white or Western missionaries, when really those funds should go towards the partners and the people of color communities that supposedly we want to support through these mission movements, or to work with these mission movements. So I think saying that we are placing trust in the hands of people of color, that they're worth our trust, that includes our finances as well. So yeah, those are all our pre-prepared questions. I'm looking now to see, I don't see any questions, but Tega, do you see questions that have come up during our conversation?
No, there haven't been questions. There have been comments, but I was wondering if we could, because your question was really broad, and try not to sound monotonous by my voice going on and on. I just did a few parts. I wonder if we could try to answer, maybe add whatever thing we still had in answering your last question.
Absolutely.
Okay, so one of the things that we have been talking about has been the Western responsibility. That is a two-way street too. The people of color have a responsibility, as we have rightly identified. There are groups who have recognized that the West is really big on savior complex, and so they use them. I remember when the British colonized Nigeria, one of the things that they did, they came with a lot of goods, which was good. You know, they brought education. That's how I got to be educated. My dad is the only Christian from his parents' kids. My grandfather was polygamous, and my dad was the only Christian. Well, guess what? He's also the only one that was educated. Why? Because to become a Christian was also to have access to all the goods that the missionaries brought with them. So for a long time, but however, like I said, when the British went, Nigerians had their own power. And so there was not that continued relationship with the British. For example, you would not see any British person today in Nigeria going there on missions, or any church sending mission trips to Nigeria. Nigeria is actually one country that is not on the map for mission programs. I go to a lot of places. I was very shocked. I went to one of our presbyteries a few months ago, and that day they had Nigeria on the map, to pray for. But what am I saying here? During that period when the British were not around, they were gone. The people owned themselves. They owned their faith. I came to faith under a Nigerian pastor. I read Western books, but it was really, my faith was formed by Nigerian spirituality. And however, as our country has colluded with corrupt practices and corrupt investors who've come into the country, and they've seen this whole big thing of the dollar, they are dropping the ball. People don't work as much as they should. They're very dependent on gifts from the West. What I want to say about that is that I think if people of color are not careful, they are going to make their place in the narrative, in the Christian narrative for this generation, redundant. Because I think about what the Apostle Paul said when he was speaking to, was it the Corinthians, that when you are supposed to be teachers, you're still drinking milk. So the question I want to ask people of color countries that are so dependent on the West to bring them teachers, rather than you setting up your own seminaries, writing your own books, writing your own theological thoughts, wrestling, all those things all by yourself, take a stand and do that. How long do you want to be babies? How long do you want to drink milk for? Because that's the way the West sees you. You are drinking milk. You're never maturing into the faith. Being a Christian is about being born into the body of Christ and being literally born in a body. You start as a baby where you're helped with your faith, but you're supposed to grow. And the West is not allowing people of color grow. We're not allowed to grow up to become teachers. No matter how much we learn, no matter how many degrees we get from them, we're not allowed to grow. That is unhealthy spirituality. Spirituality is not about the goods. It's not about the good. Jesus said, you leave all this material stuff behind and you're called. You don't have to be called outside your country, though. You can be called within your country. Whatever task you are called to help expand the gospel, to bring the kingdom of God to be manifest in a place, that's a missionary call. And I think that our churches back home, it's enough. So that's that. But I want to also share about the churches over here, what they can do to stop it, because some of the churches have formed relationships that you can just terminate that. One of the things we can do is find a different way of partnering, not so much going. Invite the people over. I really want to see our churches over here invite people of color to say, come, who can you send us that can teach something? If we think for how long the church, the voice of the teacher has always been the white person in the church, if we're talking about equal joint heirs, isn't it time the white church sits back and learn to hear our voices and say, what is God saying to us from these people? That issue of fear, I think we can lose it. Of thinking we're going to receive a wrong kind of theology. I have read many theological reasonings written by white folks that are just off the guild. And so what is there to fear? If Christ is in us, we're going to wrestle these things out. So I think it's intentional. We have to let go. The church is here. We need to let go. Let's focus on and see what God is sending us. I'm so grateful for my presbytery that had the eyes to see that it's possible for God to send someone the opposite way to them, and the way they came across and came alongside me to do that by providing financial support, by providing acceptance, by providing the space for you to just use your gifts, by trusting your credentials, not doubting it. I think I have one more thing to say to that. There are lots of people who go to mission trips and they come back, they're sharing pictures of children's faces and people. I think it's very demeaning because you are perpetuating a story. You have no clue how deep it is. I'm telling you, a child in my church, 12 years old, was asking me that question. A 9-year-old went through, a 6 or 7-year-old, 3 weeks ago, she went through a community, and the parents said that they drove through and it got to this on tarred road. She says, oh, we are in Africa. But when they went to the tarred road, she said, oh, we are in Canada. I don't know where she got that concept, but I think people get this from the pictures that are sent. And I remember a woman said to me 2 weeks ago that this is a white woman, and I'm very thankful for her, thankful for such allies that pointed out how unfair it was that if it was a child from the West, ethics require that child's face not be shown. However, people of color children are not given that same kind of confidentiality. Their faces are being shown as these impoverished children, and someday someone meets them and hear, oh, we saw your face somewhere. So I think that we need to change that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for jumping back in to add that. I think that's definitely a narrative that is perpetuated, and that this can even be perpetuated within from POC churches, especially I've seen as being part of East Asian churches, having this idea of, well, if this is all that we're seeing from these mission trips, which again is this inherited idea of what missions is from missionaries who brought white Protestantism to Korea, and then that even people of color can see other people of color in that way, in a demeaning way, saying Africans live like this, or Africans need our help, or we are somehow superior. And I loved your solution of putting in the time and the resources and organizing for people from people of color countries to come to the United States to educate, and for us to sit at their feet and to listen, and to unveil the fact that those stories are not the story. That is not the truth. Is there anybody else who would like to add either ways that we can better decenter whiteness and uphold the mission, the equality of people of color in mission movements, either in the way that we're partnering with local communities, or in choosing and defining how we determine what a missionary is and what they do. Is there anything anyone else would like to add?
Well, if we want to define a missionary is not defined by gender. A missionary is not defined by skin color. A missionary is not defined by how much in your pocket. A missionary is not defined by marital status. A missionary is not even defined by educational status, because the people that Jesus Christ sent, they were not the Sadducees or the Pharisees who had all the education in the land. We don't need the most educated people. We need the most discipled, the most well-formed, the most people who understand the practice of Christian spirituality and who are able to lend themselves to the task of bringing others alongside to learn that. It has nothing to do with age or any of those. So I want to encourage people to focus, like Micah said, on the fact that mission is the heart of God and it originates from God. Is not a white man's invention. If the Western countries cease to exist today, mission would still go on. And where would God do the mission? All over the world. And people of color, you are part of God's mission. You are part of it. Get involved in your communities. Start to see how God can use you non-monetarily. Money is not the heart of mission. I mean, the money will come from your community and all that, but seek the resources in your community to answer the problems there. I remember when I came to the US and having to answer this call, one of the things that God did for me was hard. I was not allowed to ask for anything from home. I had to let go of all the things that I was comfortable with, and I had to learn to adapt to where I was. And I think it's God's way of forcing us to see mission as a way of being with, like John Jay said, to live in that mission, in that context, such that it becomes your land. When it becomes your land, then you start to care for it. Then you start to treat it and nurture it, you know, in the biblical principles of loving your neighbor the way you love yourself. So, but when you don't do that, when you are not grounded, then you cannot develop that sense of loving your neighbor as yourself. And it's easy to have practices that are harmful towards the people that we are even serving. So, what was the second question? Yeah, so missionaries, they are people who are sent by God for the mission of God. And what is the mission of God? Reconciliation. And I think in the current day of the church, reconciliation is going to need to happen between groups that were usually apart. So with the hierarchy thing of white privilege, white supremacy. And if God is a God of equity, I think it should be hard for us to assume that he's going to be constantly sending white people to do the work of reconciliation. He's going to need to have the white position themselves in the posture of listening for a while and get comfortable with it. And I want to encourage you, there's nothing threatening about that. In my presbytery, we have a lot of fun as they get to see the African side. So yeah, we can. It's fun. It's a way of belonging. It's a way of being together, and that proclaims the gospel more than anything. Jesus says, when they see us the way we love each other, in John 17:20-23, he said that's when they believe. It didn't say when they see the way you send all those goods there. The goods are secondary. They should not be the primary purpose of mission. They should be secondary, something that comes out of dwelling and being with, and a natural response. And then, like Janji said, when you're going to respond to those needs creatively, just wait for the Holy Spirit to learn. Because another thing, us not letting people of color do their work is that their resources are either being wasted or being raped by Western exploiters. So they come in, they see the possibility and the opportunities for economic investment or whatever, they take it. And then that impoverishes the people more, makes them more dependent, and perpetuates the lie that people of color countries are poor. God, I'm so convinced of this, and I know this from my study of geography in high school. There is not a single country on earth that God did not give natural resources to. Just like he did for Adam and Eve before he put them in Eden, he created a land first with the resources, and then he put the people. So this is a lie. This lack is a lie perpetrated by Satan to deviate us from the real heart of God, which is reconciliation, where people are living together. I'll say this last thing, I'm going to stop. When I was growing up, like I said, the missionaries were already gone. But you know, the one white person that I saw, she was a member of our family. Auntie Carol, till this very day, she's British, and she's a member of a family. She was not known to us as a missionary. She was a member of our family. She came, she spent holidays. My sister went and spent holidays with her in Britain. We were family. And that visible relationship that could only be explained through Christ is what it is to be a missionary, to go and show the world that God has brought reconciliation through Jesus' death, life, death, and resurrection.
Amen. Thank you so much. I think that that's a powerful note for us to end on. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to add that's on their heart? All right. If not, then Tega, would you start us in our closing prayer? And then Micah and John Jay, you can just jump in and I will close us off.
Okay. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for letting us know in your word that in Jesus Christ, the whole world has been created by him and through him. The worlds were made, and in him and through him we're being brought together. Lord, we ask for forgiveness of the sins of us humans that have somehow made the gospel something other than it is by the way missions was done, and it has been historically handed to us. We thank you for as many whose hearts are really interested in doing missions, and we just ask, oh God, that as they hear this and they would hear what the Holy Spirit has already been speaking to them, that Lord, you will cause hearts to be willing to yield to Christ, to allow us to be formed as a people for Christ, rather than as a narrative of human invention. Father, we ask for forgiveness for the sins of the church. We ask for forgiveness for our human sins. We ask God for repentance in all nations, in our approach and design and pursuit of missions. We ask that you continue to strengthen the good examples that exist, and that, Lord, you will cause the wrong way to be toppled over in the name of Jesus. We also ask for all the missionaries on the field, but also more especially the people of color missionaries that don't get as much attention, that don't get as much notice, that are neglected, that are not even drawn into fellowship with the people of the lands to which you have sent them, because no one recognizes them as missionaries. Lord, I ask even now, Lord, that you would heal their wounds, heal our wounds, and send us and place us in communities where we will be loved, where we'll be received. And we ask, oh God, that our work will thrive and it will be a visible sign of what Christ has done in bringing different people groups together for the praise and glory of your holy name. We pray all of these things through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
God, may we not just be people who critique, but may we look within ourselves and see how we can be critiqued in order to do things differently that reflect your will. For all that we have left to do to ensure that your kingdom here on earth, your kingdom in heaven is manifested here on earth. We ask you to be with us, both now and in a time to come. Amen.
Amen.
Lord, we thank you for this wonderful time. We praise you for your power. We praise you for your grace that you've been continuously using each of us in your mission. Lord, we pray for a spiritual revival amongst your church. Lord, allow us to go back, restore the joy of our salvation, so that we might serve you and worship you in spirit and in truth. And Lord, we speak blessing to the people around us, especially those who we haven't met yet, who we haven't encountered yet, that as early as now, you are breaking the walls and the barriers of margins, you're breaking the barriers of other classifications that are not pleasing in your sight and are just the weapons of the enemy to deceive us and to divide us. And Lord, with your spirit, with your power, you will equip us for this work, for this harvest, and we will be able to worship you. All tongues, all nations, all tribes will worship you. And we want to glorify you in everything that we do. So use us continuously, Lord. Use us and bring us to the places and to the people that you need us to be.
Yes, Lord.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for each of the women here on this panel and those men and women who have attended the webinar, who've been watching us, and who will watch the rebroadcast later. And I thank you for bringing us together for this time, for this moment, to be able to have this discussion and to be able to educate and also to learn and to grow in our understanding of you and your vision for your church and the expansion of the kingdom of God on earth, the kingdom of justice, of equality, that is governed by love. And we ask that the fruit of this conversation that has begun tonight will continue to grow in our hearts and minds and in those who also come across it. And that we will see a shift and a change in your church, that our eyes will be opened to what you are doing among people of color communities around the world, and that we would be able to celebrate the joy and the gift of being able to be a part of one body, no matter where we are or where we have come from. And we just ask your grace to grow in that and to become better sisters and brothers to one another. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you all so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And we will hopefully talk again soon.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
It's been an opportunity. Nice to meet you all. Thank you.